Hello and welcome to Red Risks Media. This is a live event. Things can go wrong. Please stick with us while we try and sort some of those gremlins out. We live stream to LinkedIn, to YouTube and to Twitter, sometimes to Facebook. So please do join us on these live events. We'd welcome you to subscribe to our newsletter. No spam, I promise. It's only about the live events that are coming up. Now, enough of that. Let's just get on with the show. Terry, Mal, hi, welcome to the show. How are you both?
Good to see you again, Sonny.
And you too, Terry.
Nice to see you all after a bit of a stretch off.
Yeah, we missed you, Mal. It's lovely to see you back on the show. And, you're looking very tanned and very dapper, I must say. Where'd you go? Bahamas or something?
Yeah, I agree.
Bahamas in the back garden.
Yeah, back garden. I think this is probably just from one day's golf.
Oh, that is impressive. That's impressive. And Terry, have you been in lockdown hiatus, or are you out let loose into the world now?
No, we're in this crazy place called Texas, where the governor decided to say, okay, it's over. Go do whatever you want to do. So
wow.
we have this mix of all the way from people double masks to people wanting to kiss you. You know,
the wrong people wanting to kiss you.
Exactly.
Well, look, as I said, great to see you. We put this topic together, and what a topic. I think it's a really interesting one. So let me ask the $60,000 question, okay? How do you start a safety conversation? And maybe we can kick it off with you, Terry. How do you start a safety conversation?
Well, you don't start it by telling, you start it by asking. A conversation is a two-way thing. And most leaders and most safety professionals are not two-way communicators. They think the definition of communication is to disseminate information. And they forget that the other side of communication is that message that they're sending out needs to be received, And this article that I wrote for EHS Today on this topic is one of the most popular ones that I've ever written. I got fabulous feedback on this one from a lot of people saying I'd never really thought about it this way, but it really makes a lot of sense. But I think that's the real essence. A very famous person said that listening was empowering people by taking them seriously. And I think most leaders are much better talkers than they are listeners. And if you listen, that's where you get all this great information. And that's where conversations are so critical, because when information only flows from the top down in an organization, so many things get missed. Deming told us if you want to solve a problem, go to the level in the organization that manages that process, and talk to those people that are the real experts on that. And I think that message has been lost to a large degree in the safety practices around the world.
So Mal, starting a safety conversation, I guess you, me and Terry, we've had a lot of experience on this, haven't we, Mal?
Yeah, a fair bit, I dare say. I think I can relate back to when I was in the Army serving, and I used to do a lot of training days in the Army. And quite rightly, Terry, conversation is a great part of any training program that you run. And one of the things I got taught, and I remember quite vividly, when they say that to ensure that your captive audience has assimilated what you've actually told them, you have to get into a conversation with them and ask them the simple questions. Did you understand that? Is that what you understood? By asking simple questions and actually getting from them the feedback. And then getting the feedback, you then start this conversation of how things went. Did they go swimmingly well? Were they fully understood? Or maybe there was some clarification required. And that again, that it's all part of this communication process. And I think we've said many, many times, communication is key to any process that you are trying to run.
I remember when I was, we all go on these presentation courses and things and so on. They talk about communication. I remember one of the instructors telling me way back in my history. God, I feel old now. But anyway, they were telling me about a thing called tract. You're probably familiar with that. Anyway, tract is when someone asks you something or you're in discussion, you say, thank you, repeat, answer,
confirm, and thanks again as your exit out. I use that quite a lot when especially in presentations and so on. Is that something that we should do in conversation? Let's take safety outside for the moment. Let's just talk about conversation in general. Conversation is an art, as they say. Is that something that we should do then in terms of being respectful, follow a tracked process? Terry, what do you think?
Well, absolutely so. But I think we're losing that with media that we have here today. You know, the young people today have not had the exposure to face-to-face communication that the older generations did. In fact, when they're face-to-face, a lot of times they're texting to each other on their phones. You know, and even though that is an interactive form of communication, it's quite different than conversation. And you know, the primal textbook for communications was a book called Orality and Literacy, and it basically explored the difference between oral conversation back and forth like this and written conversation, and the constructs of each and how different they are. When my business partner first started writing articles, he wanted to write the way he speaks. And it took the girls did a lot of editing, you know, to get that to good written language, because the formals are different. But now if you're texting, which one is that? Is that orality? Not exactly. Is it literacy? No, not exactly. It's some hybrid between the two. So I think that the young people today are being raised in a more complicated communication age. And I think that makes it difficult for them. Yeah, it makes it difficult for the people who are supervising them.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Terry. And as part of this new language, as you talk about, you know, you have to think, well, when I have a captive audience of a certain age group, you have to be able to speak at their level, and not only their age, but also their academic level. I mean, if you get 3 or 4 academics together and they start discussing, they will use elongated words and, you know, highfalutin sentences. And if you do exactly the same with youngsters, they'll just sort of, huh? What's he talking about?
Exactly. You know, in technical writing, they actually rate the grade level of the communication that you're using. So they look at the vocabulary and they say, at what grade level would someone understand all this vocabulary that you're using in this and these constructs, sentence constructs and things like that you're using. And the average newspaper in the US is written at what they call an 8.5. That means if you're halfway through the 8th grade, you're going to understand all the language that's in this particular article. Well, if you've got a college degree, I mean, if you finished high school, you're a 12. If you got a college degree, you're a 16. You know, so they're aiming at halfway at your educational level out there to make sure you understand, you know, what's going on.
Now, I'm just wondering, is that scary or what? You know, because they're now thinking, well, hang on a minute, as older ones now are either too educated, or the younger ones are just not getting it because they have their own speak. If you look at a kid that's in college now and you have a look at their mobile phone, and if you have a look at their text messages, I'll almost guarantee you'll not understand what they're talking about.
Unless you speak emoji.
Yeah.
This is a great question, Sonny, by the way, that's popping up on the screen over here from Vince.
Yeah,
I think that's an excellent question.
Let me just grab this question. It must be this one. It says, help me. Is that the one? Help me as understand what is working really well here, and help me as understand what is giving you difficulty, awkward, slow, waste of time.
Just before this, but yeah.
Maybe this one. Show me how you do whatever work that is. I always found that was a successful start of the initial hello, names, greetings, etc. I can't see anything else unless it's disappeared off the screen.
Yeah, I think that's it. You know, there's nothing wrong with hello, names, greetings. You know, that's fine. But that's just an intro. That's not a conversation.
No.
And, you know, the starting of the conversation can come after that. It can come before that. It can come in, you know, in any chronological order there. You know, if they don't know who you are, it's probably good for them to know who you are and to start a conversation that way. But you haven't started a conversation. You've just introduced yourself.
Mm.
So it's like giving a talk at a conference. Someone gets up and says, okay, our next speaker is, and here's what he did, and et cetera, et cetera. The talk hasn't happened yet. That's just the introduction. And this, hello, how are you? And I'm so-and-so. That's the same thing in a conversation. It's strictly the introduction. Now, how do you get engagement? How do you get somebody to talk to you about this? And this is impacted by culture, as Mal pointed out. What is the group that you're talking to? What's the education level? What's the common interest and things like that? Can you find a hot button out there of what you're talking about? And one of the things that I've used, and again, this doesn't apply. Nothing applies everywhere all the time. Nothing's totally universal. But I like to talk to people and say, when you think about safety, what do you consider your biggest risk? Not necessarily the thing that can hurt you the worst, but the thing that's most likely to get you hurt. When you think about that, what comes to mind? Starters like this can really get people into conversation. And when your boss walks out there and says, do you understand lockout tagout? Or you think you're in compliance with lockout tagout? That's one kind of way. And as Mal pointed out, fishing for feedback, fishing for understanding is fabulously important, but the devil's in the details. I have a lot of leaders who say, well, I asked him, did you understand that? Well, in that tone, you're not asking, did you understand that? You're asking, are you stupid? Are you a moron?
That isn't it? It's the old finger wagging.
You're going to get that, an answer like that, that you weren't really looking for. So a lot of it has to do with the tone that you set, but it also has to do with sparking interest. If you're not talking about something they want to talk about, they're not going to talk to you about it. Just like a party.
Yeah.
I think also the way that the question is presented, Terry, makes a big difference. You can have an open or closed question, and if you make it a closed question, did you get that? They just say, well, yes. Sure. As opposed to saying, tell me what you understand by what we've just spoke about.
Right.
Leaves it open enough for them to come back with the feedback of what they've understood, and then, as you say, you can build the conversation from there to then, if necessary, go back over what you were trying to explain to them, or what you've already explained, and what they should have understood.
Exactly. That's what they call open-ended questions.
Absolutely.
You don't want the question to be a yes/no question. You want the question to be open-ended. Let's talk about this.
It's interesting. We've got a few sort of bits of dialogue going on ethnographic communication.
Ethnographic.
Yeah. Let me just throw a little sort of curveball in here. So we can do this in two ways. We can talk about written communication, which we'll park up for the moment. Let's talk about oral, verbal sort of communication. It's interesting how I read this book at the beginning of the year. I think it was the beginning of the year or something. When I read a review, I think Mal was involved. It's called The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. And he went around to some of the companies where he said, look, I've analyzed these companies. I think Google was in them, various others, and he said what he found in terms of high levels of engagement and great conversation was when they had what he called the density, the conversation density, where he described it as if you have 10 people in the conversation, everyone he noticed in that superbly functioning organization had equal weight contribution in the conversation. It wasn't as if one person was sat and just doing all the talking. He said that sort of a culture, where he called the belonging culture, the values, belonging cues, really made the company perform well. Do you think that's a fair comment? That do you think that conversations are biased and sometimes leaders don't get it? They feel that they have to be going around shouting with a big stick, or do you think things are changing more now? I'll start off with you, Terry, first.
Well, it depends on where you go. When someone tells me that they have analyzed the culture at Google, I go, oh, really? Which part of it? Google is acquiring 4 companies a month. I've talked to the safety professionals there. They can't incorporate 4 companies a month into their safety program. They have to make sure that they have their own safety programs, and that they can keep those going until at some point in the who knows when future, they can start trying to bring all those things together. I mean, one of my first clients had 17 sites. No 2 of those 17 sites was identical. You know, they didn't have they had identical machines, they had identical products that they were making. They didn't have identical cultures. They didn't have identical safety issues. You know, they were all unique and individual. But yeah, I think in general, you know, when you go to an organization where one person dominates the conversation and everyone else kind of looks at them from the side and, you know, and lets them be the spokesperson for that, that tells you about something about the culture and the communication in that organization. You know, that one person is the brave person who'll speak up, and the rest of them really don't want to be heard. You know, that they don't want to be a voice out there that could be criticized or, you know, whatever it is that happens in that organization. So I think it's a valid observation.
Mm-hmm. Mal, we've got questions, but go ahead, Mal. Have you got anything on your mind on that one about the density?
I was actually going to say that. Yeah, based on that, one of the companies that I worked for in the last couple of years, a big pharmaceutical company, and we used to have a control tower every morning. I'm sure you might be familiar with the control tower meetings, and that's where all the senior management get together. But it's an opportunity for every manager to have an input, to listen to what's been said by all the other managers for what happened yesterday, what's going to happen today, and what's projected to happen in the future for that particular company. And everybody in there had, albeit it was always time constrained, so you weren't there to waffle just to hear your own voice. You was there to say what your specific department had done yesterday, what you're doing today, and what you're going to be doing tomorrow. And everybody was able to input to that. And that is part and parcel of, I suppose, team building the culture, and getting everybody to be able to have the conversation, whether it's uncomfortable or not, have the conversation of what's happening with everybody.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks, Mal. We've got Tim on chat here. It'd be terrible if we don't bring in the chats as conversations. Okay, starting a chat conversation. So Tim says,
that's a great question too.
Yeah, Tim says the first question you ask is critical as it signifies what is important to you. So asking about production first can wholly be counterproductive. So well said, isn't it? So what was your targets this year, and did you make it?
Well, I hate separating production from safety and quality and reliability, because they're really all one issue. And when people want to start creating this dichotomy, I like to nip it in the bud. You know, so I think talking about productivity is the way to start a safety conversation. You know what the main enemies of productivity are? They're safety, quality, and reliability. These are the three things that can kill productivity. So how can you talk about safety versus productivity? What's your highest priority? You know, in a life coach one time that was working with me in my corporate career came in, and he would write on the board, self, family, career. And he'd say, which one of these three is the most important? You know, which one of these is your top priority? And everybody would speculate a little bit like that. He'd draw a big circle around all of them, and he'd say, these are the same thing. You know, this is your challenge in your life, is balancing these three things, you know, and making them all work like that. I think the same thing's true of productivity. When you talk about productivity, if you don't include safety as a part of that definition, if you don't include quality as a part of that definition, if you don't include reliability as a part of that thing, you're not looking at the whole picture. You know, production isn't a separate thing from those other things. They are all totally interrelated.
But it's all about that belonging again, isn't it? I mean, if you start putting people in pigeonholes, say, well, your safety, I'm not going to talk to you about production. I'm not going to talk to you about finance. I'm not going to talk to you about digital technology. You sort of alienating them in some way. I think you can have a conversation about production and safety and so on in the right ways. If so long as you don't start beating people up and saying, well, your key performance indicators are terrible, what are you going to do about it? And do the old finger waving and bullying and so on. People are so sensitive to that now, and before you know it, there'll be a whistleblower of some sort, maybe even take you to court, I suspect. So Mal, what do you think? Production versus safety, different or contributory, or what do you think?
No, I totally agree with Terry, that it is all part and parcel of one. I mean, funny enough, I read an article today from WHO, World Health Organization, and they were on about all the leaders that they've got together to now formulate a plan of attack, excuse the pun, for anything that may happen in the future, so that they can work together. And one of the parts that I read, and I found it so pertinent for everything that you do, whether it's quality, reliability, maintainability, or safety, and that is, nobody is safe until everyone is safe. And I thought, wow, that's quite a powerful statement, really.
Very.
When you apply that right across the board, as you just said, Terry, reliability, quality, safety, it's all part and parcel of nobody is safe until everyone is safe.
It's that belonging thing again, isn't it? We've got a couple of things coming in. Mal, you might have to put your light on. It's very just about make out in there, but I know it's summertime, but I think we're being robbed of daylight a little bit. Now,
I just put my window.
Yeah, Ida says hi. Thanks. Nice to hear from you. I will just catch up on a few things. Vince says danger kills productivity, safety helps it. Now, Gary's come in with a question, and when Mal gets back, we'll sort of chime in on this one as well. Mal, can you hear me there?
Yeah.
Right. So Gary says, interesting about pharmaceutical regular meetings. I've just finished 17 years in the NHS. Every day before the list starts, theatres have daily safety briefings. Yes, this usually involves talking about patient safety, any incidents, lessons learned. All sounds good, which it was. However, I'm not sure it was a true safety conversation in the sense that we're talking about. Well, there's conversations, isn't there? What do you think, Terry?
Well, that it can be either way. I think those kind of meetings. I've done a lot of work with hospitals, and when they change shifts in hospitals, they have a meeting where they hand off everything from that one shift to the next shift. So they talk about every patient, everything that's happened, and the whole thing. I've seen those meetings that were a speech by the head nurse, and I've seen those meetings where everybody in there participated and handed off their patients to the person who was taking their particular group of patients and everything else. So I've seen those go both ways in a number of instances. But no, I tend to agree. A lot of those meetings are speeches. Yeah. They are the leaders standing up and saying, let me summarize what happened, over the last little while, and so you're aware of what's going on. That's better than nothing. Definitely so. But I think you're right. In classification, I wouldn't classify that as a conversation the way we're talking about it right now.
Mal, thank you.
Yeah. By the way, Mal, the one thing that I would offer with what you just said, nobody's safe until everybody's safe. It's absolutely true. But there's also the oxygen mask principle, right? Put yours on first before you help somebody else,
Oh, yeah.
And if you can't be safe yourself, you can't help other people be safe.
That's true as well. Mal, thank you for putting your light on, Mal. I appreciate that. Look,
you're going to get more of a 10.
You send me the bill. Okay, solar powered, isn't it? Of course. Gary saying, definitely agree. Speeches, not conversation. Okay, so Mal, let's be honest here. Okay, you can have all sorts of conversations. You can have a regular, how are you? What they call, was it a coffee corner, whatever they call it, water cooler conversation, isn't it, Terry? They call them. Okay, and there's others which we've had. And I know I'm going to use the word accident here, and some people don't like it. Okay, incident, accidents, whatever you want to call them. Okay, we've had that. We've got to have a conversation. Get around the table. It's got to be done. So there's quite a different variation in conversations. Some very painful, some very delectable and nice to be in. Let's start with something that's really hairy. Let's start with talking about safety conversation, which is not a good conversation. Mal, how would you start a conversation in safety where you had to pull someone to one side?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's never easy to engage with somebody when you know yourself that excuse the language, a bollocking's coming up here. I mean, the gaffer has said to you, Mal, go and speak to that guy, sort him out. So, I mean, you have to, and I have had this conversation with a few guys on big contracts, and one of the I'm trying to relate back to one of them. I remember a welder that was out on the job, and he was trying to get the job done as quickly as he could, and he wasn't using the full equipment that he should have been using for protection, etc., etc. And I think I remember the conversation started around like, "Are you married?" He said, "Well, yeah, I am married." I said, "Do you have any children?" He said, "Yeah." And I reached in my wallet and I pulled out. I said, "Look," I said, "there's a photograph of my grandkids. And when I finish the project, I go home to those grandkids and I'll be able to see them." I said, "Now," so you can see now where this conversation may be going. If you fail to wear the protective equipment that's been supplied for your job, what do you think? As opposed to me just saying, "Oh, you're going to get this or you're going to get that," you can say, what do you think could happen if you fail to wear your equipment? "Oh, well, yeah, I know I could get burned or I could get damage to me." I said, "Yeah, damage to your eyes." Now, just bear that in mind. Damage to your eyes can be irreparable. And by the time you think about it, it's too late. And then you ain't going to see your grandkids anymore. You ain't going to see your kids anymore. These are the things that you have to think about. And I think when you try and, I suppose, empathize with the workers and explain to them that wearing PPE is not just because you've got to wear it. There's a reason for it. And if you explain that reason I suppose in the right manner, a lot of people will take that on board. That's how I would approach it.
That's interesting. So you're really appealing to them in the context of framing it as to what would happen if you lost the use of that faculty, of that particular capability.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean,
Terry?
you could use that in a number of ways. A number of ways. Even working at heights, and I know working at heights is probably one of the biggest dangers that we have in industry, because of, yourself, somebody falls from heights, they're either severely injured, badly injured, or they're crippled, or they're even killed.
Yeah.
And it happens in the blink of an eye.
Yeah. Terry,
so you have to, I think, bring into the conversation.
Yeah. Terry.
I couldn't agree more with Mal, but one of the things that you're touching on is that human beings react emotionally before they react logically. And so often in safety, we tell them all the facts, and then we say, "Oh, this is important because of." That's backwards. You got to tell them why it's important and everything, and then start going into the details. When I worked with the Johnson Space Center of NASA back a number of years ago, one of the things I found out, what everybody was trying to do at the Johnson Space Center in safety? Protect the astronauts. They're trying to keep the astronauts from getting killed or getting injured or whatever it is like that. Well, 60 of them got injured. There's 12,000 of them. 60 of them got injured on the ground every year. They weren't even working on that. They weren't even focused on that. So one of the things that I did, they all wear a name badge. And I had them redo these name badges where on the back of it, it said, "Who else?" And they all had to bring a photo and put it in the back of their name badge. But besides the astronauts, which were all working to protect, who else are you safe for? And they wound up with pictures of spouses, grandkids, dogs, a little bit of everything. But it's a really interesting thing. If you ever go to the Johnson Space Center, ask an employee to see the back of their badge, and it's going to say, "Who else?" And it's going to have that photo on the back over there. Safety can't be for just hypothetical stuff. It's got to be for a reason that touches your heart. It's got to elicit emotional response. And I think that's what you were getting at, Mal. You're getting this person to not only think about, well, what's the technical stuff? What are the rules? What are the procedures? What do I have to do like that? You're talking about why you have to do it.
Exactly. They don't have to know the rules and regulations, but they have to know the reason behind the logic that you're trying to impart onto them. And I think a lot of people will take that on board much easier than trying to ram regulations, rules, and policies and procedures down their throat.
So,
I've been highly criticized for saying it, but I've told a lot of leaders rules are for games. You know, if you want safety to be a game, make up rules and you know, penalize people for not following the rules. I said, but if you want safety to be real, teach people the principles. You know, the principles of safety. What is it? How can you get hurt? How can you avoid getting hurt? If they understand that from a principle action, you don't have to make a rule for each particular application of that principle. People understand, you know, what it is that they really need to do. And I think that's an approach that very few organizations have taken, but the few that I've talked into taking it have some spectacular performance in safety.
Yeah, I mean, very short, quickly. I mean, I remember working with British Energy, and we were doing inside the reactor work, and we practiced for 14 weeks solid. 14 weeks practice. The teams went in the reactor, out of the reactor, in a mock-up, in the reactor, out of the reactor, and they'd done that day in, day out, day in, day out. And the actual project itself took 10 days.
Wow.
But 14 weeks practice to get that perfect. And I suppose that takes me back to, again, military terminology, which is preparation and planning prevent poor performance.
The P rule. Yeah.
Yes.
That reminds me of the expression of people who say practice makes perfection, but I think our friend Scott Geller turned it around to practice makes permanence, which is your 14-day thing. You know, people got so used to it. Let's grab some of these comments that are coming in. So Vince is saying, in my mining days, the outgoing deputy supervisor wasn't allowed to leave the mine until they'd spoken to the incoming deputy about the safety and operations that was written into the mine's ages. That's all about the handover, which is absolutely right. You have to tell, otherwise it's going in like this, isn't it? Jeanette, lovely to see you, Jeanette, on, and we miss you today. We will catch up with you soon.
Hi, Jeanette.
Look who's on, Jeanette. Agrees with you, Mal. Question is why, not always about how and what. Now, Ugachukwu Godwin says safety conversation should target. Apologies, Ugachukwu, I spelled your name incorrectly there. I said it wrong. Should target the seat of motivation, the heart. When we build trust and showing personal interest in the workers, we surely connect and effectively converse. We're back to belonging again, aren't we? There.
Right.
And Tim is saying. I strongly suggest that leadership engagement, the safety conversation, should be considered as a competence. You got it, Tim. Couldn't agree with you more there.
Just how few organizations actually measure competence. Though.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of the most important things in safety, and nobody has a metric. We got all these people my age retiring, and all these people that just came into the workplace taking their place. And I ask all these organizations, how much competence are you losing when those people retire and these people take their places? Oh, well, I don't know. There's not a metric for it. They're not measuring that. And it's a critically important metric.
Terry, you're retiring. You're only 21. What are you retiring? Look, I'm going to throw my next curveball in now. Okay. So we know safety conversations are important, and we do our best as practitioners to go and talk to the people, empathizing, making sure we don't step on their toes, and trying to make them feel like we understand the situation, trying to get them on board, etc. Let me give you a story, a very quick story. When I was in Iraq for an oil super major, and we were going around checking the sites and the facilities, there was one group of people working on a pipeline. It had a leak, and they were working away on it, and this guy had almost like a welding torch and a rag and a bucket next to him. I thought, good grief, what's going on here? I don't want to be too close to this, right? So I said through the translator, I said, what are you doing? Let's have a conversation about this. And I explained that, I was trying to explain about fire and potential risks and everything else. And the guy turned around to me, the guy who was doing the welding, and he said to me, yes, but I keep forgetting that this is no longer the old regime. In the old regime, I had a guy behind me, a soldier with an AK-45 saying, fix it, otherwise you will not be seeing your family again, right? And he realized that the easiest thing to do, or the less riskier option, was to fix the leak. So my point here is, you can have a conversation, but some habits are hard to break. How do you turn a safety conversation with someone who's so stone-faced about doing it the way they want to do? How do you get them to come to your side? Okay, Mal, I know you're going to say make them realize that they could lose their eyes on, but is that the only way? Are there other options then? Mal, start with you.
I'm sure there are other options of encouraging people to change their habits. You could maybe take them to one side and take them further down the workshop and show them how somebody else is working, and ask the question, see how these people are working here. What do you think of that? What do they do different to what you do? Again, trying to turn the conversation back around to letting them think it's them that's identifying this, not what I've identified. I suppose it's a bit of reverse psychology.
That does work. I mean, Terry, what's your thoughts about maybe how we engage people when they're not always ready to be engaged?
Well, I back up a step and I ask people, what is your definition of safety? A lot of people say, well, I've done this 100 times and I've never gotten hurt. And I said, is that your definition of safety? Not getting hurt? And they, well, yeah. I said, is that a definition or is that a goal? And I said, well, yeah, that's what I'm trying to accomplish over here. I said, well, do you think what you just did is going to accomplish that every time? Then what I'm getting at here, and I've been working on this for years and years. I've got a YouTube video on this and everything else. It's what we call low probability risk. And if you believe the National Safety Council here in the U.S. and several other reporting agencies around the world, the average worker who gets hurt on the job is taking a 1 in 500 and something risk. Now that's not everything. That's a huge average, so it works the other way. But if you've done something several hundred times and gotten away with it, is that because it's safe or is that because it's a low probability risk?
LPR.
And if you can't separate those two things out, you don't understand that principle. And a lot of old workers have done it 300 times and gotten away with it. And what they don't understand is if they do it 200 more times, they're going to get hurt, or they're going to play out the probability anyway of getting hurt. And you know how probabilities work out. I mean, if it's 1 in 500, one person does it their whole life and never gets hurt. Another person does it 500 times and gets hurt twice, You add them together and divide by 2, But I think that's the principle. I don't think it's just old habits. I think it's old habits reinforced by experience. And that experience of not getting hurt, a lot of people equate that with safety. Well, if safety is not getting hurt, then anything that I do that doesn't get me hurt must be safe, and that's the myth you got to dispel to get these old workers to rethink what they're trying to do. At least it's the best one I've come up with. And 150 years working on safety.
I think it's back to the old adage, Terry, that, I've been doing this for 20 years and whether it's right or wrong, I've never hurt myself.
Habit.
Yeah, exactly.
It's habit though, isn't it?
Habit. Yeah.
Oh, if you go to someone in a casino and they say, well, I played craps for 15 minutes. $200. I played craps
never won.
Terry, I keep playing the lottery. All right. I'm not winning yet. All right.
It's the accident lottery.
Vince is saying 4 essential skills for safety conversation: enthrall, inspire, mesmerize, fascinate equals interest and engagement. Vince, you've got to come up with some sort of a monogram or whatever that we can memorize and remember.
Yeah.
That's EIMF. Okay. Now I don't know who this is. I think it might be Dom Cooper, but I'm not sure. It says, Tim Ingram, a level of cultural competencies is also important.
Absolutely.
Yes. And Jeanette saying,
Hi, Dom.
I think so too, yeah. Jeanette saying conversation is also about giving the right and positive feedback, coming back to ABC model. Now, Dom, you can chime in on that one.
Antecedent behavior and consequence.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, wait, we've got some more coming in. Hugo Cheku says, when we evaluate workers' risk appetite, that's that risk appetite again, beyond the work environment and their immediate actions, we begin to have insight into what really influences the behaviors. And Jeanette says, language is another element of conversation. Change your words, change your world. Now, talking about language, we are now...
Be careful, Scott may be listening.
Well,
Oh,
I hope
Terry.
I
You have
hope
to have a
Scott
think.
I hope Scott's listening, because
Yeah.
he'll be talking about positive psychology. Because I remember a couple of shows ago, and I was talking about something, and Scott said, "Oh, you've got the flow piece in positive psychology. How about psychology, behaviors, all of those things? Do we need to get it that complex when we talk to people? Should we not just be treating them like human beings and just engage in a discussion? Do I have to think, Terry, about what you're doing and when your arms are like this and whether you're scratching your head and twisting your legs and so on? Do I have to get into those mode? Why can't we make conversation simple? What do you think, Terry?
I don't think I don't. Psychology is about individuals, and when you start trying to apply it to groups, you just hopelessly complicate it. Okay, this guy's got his arms folded. This guy's wide open. Where do you hit the middle? Where do you hit the common ground out there? But here's the thing that I think, and this is where Scott and I have had this conversation many times. I made the comment, and he criticized me for it, that trying to turn people into amateur psychologists. I said, you don't want to do that, because amateur psychologist is the second most dangerous thing you can put in an organization, second only to a professional psychologist, which, of course, Scott took immediate exception.
I wonder why.
Here's the point. You have to be true to psychology, but you don't have to be a psychologist. You've got to take that science and turn it into technology. You've got to take those truths that are behind all of that stuff that you can't get anybody to pay attention to everything like that. And you've got to turn it into a simple, usable, practical, workable model that someone can apply out there in the workplace. And it won't be inclusive. It won't be totally perfect, but again, we have a saying, I won't get into the politics, but there's a certain group of people who are hung up on the process, and there are other people who are hung up on the results. And neither one of them are totally wrong, but either one of them to the extreme can be dangerous. If I'm a very results oriented person. You tell me, well, this is the way to do that, and I said, no, it's not. It doesn't work. We've done it a dozen times, and it doesn't work. So I don't care how theoretically perfect it is. It doesn't work. But on the other hand, if you ignore the theoretical, you do it at your own peril, because you're going to fall into those practical traps that stuff can help you avoid. So I think it's a melding of these two things. You've got to be true to the science, but you got to be realistic about how you apply it out there in the real world.
You do realize you've opened up a Pandora's box here, because Mal is into behaviors and speciality. Mal, over to you.
I'm not gonna bite into that. No.
Fishing time. Never mind golf. It's fishing.
But certainly, if you look at the behavioral safety, there is a certain element of psychology applied into that, and I think you're probably right, Terry, in saying that we're not trying to produce a workforce of amateur psychologists. I think is what you're trying to do is, I'll use a great word for you, inculcate safety into their hearts as a value, not as a priority. If you can teach them to appreciate safety as a value, not as a priority, and not as a procedure or a policy, then I think you're halfway there at least to win. And another term that's been battered about recently, win the hearts and minds of the workforce in a very sensible way.
But an example of what I'm talking about, Sonny, Dan Peterson, who I worked with quite a bit over the years, had a model of 9 reasons why people take risks. The influences that would make people take a risk. As you probably know, reason has 42 or something like that. You know the difference between a slip and a lapse? I don't either. But I came up with the model.
The memory cells, I think. Yeah,
I've worked with both of these guys, and I came up with a model with 4 things. I made it into a little diamond like that, You know, and these four things, they're not inclusive, they're not exclusive, they don't split the atoms, you know, between this and that and everything else, but they're the four general things. And in general, what happens is, if this is the problem, you solve it one way. If that's a problem, you solve it another way, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So it's dividing them not by the minutia of the difference of why somebody wouldn't be safe. It's divided by the action plan that you would come up to correct that. You know, well, I mean, Reason and Patterson both just beat me to death over that because it's not correct. You know, it's not correct. And they're, but you know what? It works.
Yeah.
150 teams out there that are using it every day to improve safety.
Yeah.
Can remember it. They can use it. It's, you know, it's practical.
Yeah.
And, you know, each one of my little things includes probably several others, you know, without dividing them up into little, you know, smaller bites and pieces like that. But that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You know, if you go back, the foundation of it came from them. You know, I learned from Dan Peterson. I learned from Reason. You know, all of them taught me something. But you know, they are scholarly. That, like you're talking about, Mal, they're using a different vocabulary out there, and their vocabulary doesn't translate to the average worker on the shop floor.
Let's come back to vocabulary. That's a really good point you've raised there. And I just want to say thank you to Tim Ingram, for letting me know it wasn't Dom Cooper with this message. It was Clayton Downs. He says, I agree. Clayton, my apologies. Okay, he says, agree, all very much part and parcel of the overall competence suite. I think we've done this one about language from Jeanette. And here's one from Katarzyna. It says, I think the coin method could be useful. What's that? The old flip and your heads and tails or something, I guess.
Yeah.
Let me
jump tail we don't.
That's right. Yeah. Let me ask you about vocabulary. Okay. As you know, in fact, both of you were involved when we did the Dave Snowden stuff on Kinevin, right?
Oh gosh, yeah.
And it was Mal, I think, and Mal said it, but I was thinking it, and afterwards we discussed it, and that is, we said to Dave, why are you using words like, I don't know, anthropological and stuff like that, unless I have a dictionary handy with me? Because earlier on you talked about the readability index, Terry, right? Which is how J.K. Rowling wrote her book on Harry Potter. She wrote it for grade 8 sort of people. How are you writing these things with such complicated words and saying, well, I'm going to demystify complexity and make it simple, but I'm going to use complex words? So Mal, you started the conversation, and Dave's response was, well, I want to change the language. I want to try and get people to talk in a new vocabulary. And I thought, my God, we're struggling with the existing vocabulary already, you know, with emojis and everything else creeping in. What is this thing with vocabulary?
That's why I mentioned earlier on, you know, when you were talking, when you have your captive audience, I think you have to, you've got to know your audience. I was always taught, before you even go and try and teach your audience anything, know who your audience is. Know at what level you have to pitch your wares so that they can fully understand and appreciate what it is you're having to offer. And as you mentioned with Dave and Kinevin, it was an extremely interesting session that we had, and there was a lot of new things in there. Although they've been around for some 20 odd years, there were some new things in there that I hadn't looked at or thought about within a safety environment. But the language that was used was at a very high academic level. And it's okay if you were talking maybe on a platform with TED and you're talking to all the CEOs in America, et cetera, who understand that level of language. But I think if we are looking here, for example, starting a safety conversation and you aim it immediately at that level, you will lose 2/3 of your audience straight away because they think, I have no idea what he's talking about.
But let me push back on that, Mal. I don't think the C-suite understand that language. Terry, if I went to some of your C-suite leaders and started talking about aperitic systems and anthropology and all of those things, they're going to look at me and say, Who the hell is this guy, Terry? Get him
Maybe
out of
you're
here.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think, Terry?
Maybe the wrong choice of level.
No, you're right. But again, it's not necessarily just levels. I mean, you can't say that everybody with a 16 level education speaks the same language.
True.
We have silos there. You know, when I'm speaking to engineers, you know, I speak a different language than when I'm speaking to salespeople. You know,
Absolutely.
I mean, it's a whole different vocabulary in what you're doing, and I think creating this common vocabulary in safety is incredibly important. And that's why I get criticized so often by the academics, because I tend to use common, understandable language. For instance, one of the things in my little model I was just talking about, I call it habit. Oh man, you ought to hear that. You ought to hear the attacks that I get. Well, that's the most unscientific term I've ever. Well, I mean, I can use the psychological terms, you know, of learned behavior, pattern behavior, reinforced behavior, you know, autotomic behavior, you know, but nobody understands it, and everybody knows what a habit is. You know, now they don't have a scientific definition of it, but they understand the principle. You know, if you can do it without consciously thinking about it and making a decision. It's a habit, right? So,
well, habits now got more popular thanks to Charles Duhigg and his book on the power of habit. You know, he talks about was it cue, action, and reward or whatever.
Yeah,
we've got a couple more questions and comments coming in. So Vince says, observe workers doing their stuff. Vince, why didn't you jump on the show? I sent you the link. You know, I mean, you should be on the show. Observe workers doing their stuff, especially non-standard tasks. Say a breakdown situation, ask what's the plan. So that's really taking them bit by the hand rather than taking them to the cliff edge and pushing them over, I guess. Gary, great to see you. Thank you for your lovely email the other day. Gary says, understanding psychology through engagement gets to know people's beliefs and values, which will ultimately affect their behavior, which could be positive and negative. Good engagement will ultimately understand motivation for the task, job, etc. Listening is the best tool we have as health and safety practitioners. That reminds me of that expression, doesn't it? Why do we have 2 ears and 1 mouth? Got to spend twice as long listening as you do talking. Now, Jeanette says, conversation is also about ability to listen and hear. I'll tell you what.
Absolutely.
Time has flown by in this conversation, guys. You know, 53 minutes we've chalked up.
But I told you I had 5 hours worth of material.
It's all right for you. You're 5.5+ hours behind. You know, we're still just about coping past the clock changes.
There's one more issue, if I may, Sonny, that I think is really critically important to this, and that is that communication needs to be sticky. There are 2 brothers who are business professors at 2 different business schools here in the U.S., and they wrote a book called Made to Stick.
Made to Stick, yeah.
And it's basically what makes communication memorable. My COO in my company came up with the term that I use all the time right now. He calls it ROA. Everybody knows what ROI is. It's return on investment, right? But what's ROA? It's return on attention. So you tell people, pay attention. I'm going to give you some information. What did you get back for that? Can they remember it tomorrow? Can they remember it next week? Can they remember it next month? If it's important, can they recite it back to you? This little book, Made to Stick, it's a very, very wonderful little quick read, and it's got an acronym to help you remember the things that make communication sticky, if you want to use that particular term. But I think that's the one part that we forget very often in safety too. You know, some things go in one ear and out the other. Other things stick in your head forever. You know, are we making our safety communication? Are we using the right tools to make it stick? Once people have this conversation, but the conversation itself is one of the tools. Interaction is one of the tools that makes information sticky. You know, the fact that you participated in it, not just got it thrown at you.
But again, I can also tell you that to make sure that it does stick, it goes back to the old acronym KISS. Keep it.
Yeah, exactly.
I've changed that, Mal. I knocked the last S off. I just call it keep it simple. Because I said it to a couple of people and they said, "You're calling me stupid." I said, "No, I'm not calling you stupid. It's just the expression. Just keep it simple." Tim has come in. Now, I actually looked at Tim's profile. He's ex-BP like me. So Tim, great to see you on the show. He says, specific care on safety discussion topic selection needs to be taken in major hazard environment. Oh, yeah. I mean, as per Macondo, that's a show in itself, Tim. We should get you on the show for that one. Last sort of 5 minutes freestyling. Okay, I'm going to ask each of you to give me your sort of closing thoughts and one piece of advice that you would give for starting a safety conversation. And if I may, I'll start with Mal first.
Good.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's Terry.
We haven't got 5 hours, by the way, Terry.
So for me, I mean, one thing that I would definitely look at in starting the conversation, obviously, is observe the space. If you are too close to somebody, then there may be a thing.